at this point in time, we are going to implement what is known as model binding. And model binding is a powerful and customizable feature inside Asp.NET Core that eliminates the grind of dealing with HTTP requests directly, and it lets you work with C# objects rather than having to deal with the individual data values sent by the browser. Alright, so to demonstrate how this works, I am going to have to do some prep work, and one of the features of this application is that we will present a summary page or a list with the details of who is attending our event. So in order to do this, I will need to keep track of the responses that I receive from each guest that books or RSVPs for our event. So to do this, I'll have to create an in-memory collection of all the different objects or persons that I've booked. And of course, this wouldn't be useful in a real application because the response data will be stored in memory, and when you stop the application or restart it, it will disappear. So we will persist our objects later on, but for now we're going to just demonstrate this with an in-memory collection of our objects. All right, so let's navigate back to our models directory, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this file our repository. So let's call it repository.cs, and we're going to be using the system.collections.generic library, and of course the namespace is going to be our bookings.models, and inside this we're going to have a public static class, which will be our repository. All right, so inside our repository, we're going to have several private static classes. So the first one will be a private static list, and this will store our guest status. And we're going to call this responses and set this equal to a new list of our guest status. Next, we'll have a public static IEnumerable. And inside this, we will have our guest status. And this will be set to responses, and we'll be using our lambda expression and setting it to our responses. And now we'll have our method. So we'll have a public static void method, and we'll call this add response. So we'll have our guest status and our response object, and inside our method we will set it equal to responses dot add response. So this repository class and its members are static, and this will make it easy for us to store and retrieve data from different places in our application. So of course, ASP.NET provides a more sophisticated approach for defining these common functionality, and it's called dependency injection. We will look at dependency injection in a later video. So now that I have somewhere to store the data, I can update the action method in our controller, which will make it easy for me to store and retrieve data from different places. All right, so I can update the action method that receives the HTTP post requests. So let's navigate to our post method, and here I can simply say repository dot add response, and we're going to use our guest status as our parameter or as our argument, and in the view we can return a string. So let's just say thanks, and we're also going to include the guest status. So before this method is invoked, the model binding feature will extract the values from the HTML form, assign them to the properties in the guest status object, which is passed to this action method, and this add response will store each one of our bookings. So the last view that I'm going to add is our thank you view. Let's navigate to our home directory and create a new file, and let's just call this thanks.cshtml. And again, I am going to copy the HTML from my index page just to make it a bit easier. And I'm going to paste it inside my thanks method. And I'm also going to need this model directive. Let's go back here and let's paste this at the top. So I have my bookings model for my guest status. And let's change this title to thanks. All right, so inside our div, we're going to have a header. And let's change this to an H1. And this will just say, thank you. And we're going to use the model dot name. And we'll put an exclamation after the name. All right. So we're going to thank our attendee. And below this, we're going to put a directive. So anytime we're using a directive, we have to type the @ symbol. So we're going to have an if statement. And we're going to say if model dot will attend is equal to true, then I'll simply type a message. It's great that you're attending. Can't wait to see you there. And we're also going to have an else, and this is going to say sorry that you cannot make it, and thanks for letting us know. And below this div, I am going to have a button that allows them to view a list of the persons that will be attending. So this will be an Asp action, and I'm going to set this equal to list responses, and I'm going to put here to see who's attending. All right, so the HTML that's produced by this thanks view depends on the values that get assigned to the guest status view model. And these values will be provided by the RSVP form action method. So you'll notice that I'm able to access the values of any property in the domain object, and by using the @model and dot operator. And I'm able to select any one of the property names inside my guest status model. All right, so now that we have created the thanks view, I have a basic working example of handling a form. So at the end of our thanks page, you'll notice I added an element that will create a link to display the list of people who are attending the event. And I'm using the ASP-action tag helper attribute to help us to create a URL that will target the action method, and it's called list responses. So in order for this to work, I'll have to add this action method in our home controller. So let's navigate back to our home controller, and we're going to add a public view result, and we're going to call it list responses. And let's not forget our parentheses. And inside our curly brackets, we're going to return a view. And we're going inside our view, we're going to have our repository.responses.where, and we're going to use a temporary variable here, and we're going to use a lambda. So we're going to say where r.will attend is equal to true, and this will simply display all of our attendees who have selected that they will be attending. To display this list, we will need a view to display the list, and I will call this view list responses.cshtml. Okay, and again, I'm going to copy the HTML from our thanks view so that I do not have to type it out. And I'm going to replace this model with an IEnumerable. And inside here, I'm going to have my bookings.models.guest status. And let's change this title to responses. And inside the body, let us change the contents. So first, let's just have a div. Or first, now let's have an h2. And let's say here's the list of the attendees. And now we can define a table if we want. So let's quickly define a table to display our attendees. So let's have a table head. And inside my table head, let's add a row. So let's add a tr for a row. And inside our row, let's define a table header inside our row. So let's say name. And let's copy this a few more times. So we're going to display the name, email, and phone. So name, email, phone. So let's change this. Email, phone. And now let's define the table body. And now we're going to use another directive, which is a for loop that will show us all the attendees. So we're going to use the @ symbol, and we're going to use a for each. And inside our parameter here, we're going to have bookings.models.guest status. And we're going to just define this as R in model. And we're going to have a table row. So let's define a table row. And inside our row, we're going to have our table data. So the first one will be r.name. And we can copy this 2 more times. All right, so name, email, and phone. And now we have closed our table body and our table object. So let us run our program and let's add a few attendees to our application and view the attendees. All right, so let's book. And let's just say John Brown. Let's say jb@outlook.com. And John Brown will be attending. So we get our thank you page when our form gets submitted, and we get our message. It's great that you're attending. Can't wait to see you there. And now we can click to see who is attending. All right, so we only have one attendee at the moment, which is John Brown. Okay, so if we go back to our home page, let's add another attendee. Mary Wallace, mw@gmail.com. And Mary will be attending. Yes, she will be there. And now she has been added to our list as well. Let us do one more attendee. So let's book. And let's just say Jen White. And let's just say jw@yahoo.com. And let's add a number here. And now Jane will not be able to attend. So no, she cannot attend. Let's submit this. And we still get our thank you page, but we get our message that, sorry, you cannot make it. Thanks for letting us know. All right, so our application logic is working. And if Jen clicks to see who's attending, only John and Mary are attending. Jen doesn't get added to this list. So our application is working nicely. So in our next video, we'll be adding validation to our application. So if somebody goes to book and they enter some wrong values and do not enter anything in the other fields, it should not submit this form if the person does not enter a proper value. So we'll be adding validation to our application in the next video.